Why does the 21st century feel so medieval? We have AI, quantum computing, and space exploration, yet we are witnessing brutal wars driven by identity, land, and faith. Most analysts will tell you about NATO expansion or energy dependencies. They aren't wrong, but they are only describing the hardware. They are missing the software, the religious and philosophical mental OS that actually drives human action. In Japan, there's a saying, ultimately, a human being only needs half a tatami mat to sit on and one tatami mat to sleep on. However, people from other countries might not understand such a state of enlightenment. With that in mind, I decided to research and organize this idea. Even within Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which all share the Old Testament as their source text, they could be broadly divided into two categories: traditional religions and denominations that value poverty, and religions and denominations that view worldly prosperity as a blessing from God. Denominations that value poverty are closer to the enlightenment and detachment embodied in the phrase sitting on half a tatami mat. Firstly, Catholicism and monastic traditions are closer to enlightenment and detachment. There's a tradition that values the virtue of poverty, exemplified by Saint Francis of Assisi, and the detachment that ultimately worldly wealth is empty is highly valued as a monastic ideal. Detachment, letting go, abandoning attachment. The idea that true freedom lies in possessing nothing but God is the closest to Japanese enlightenment. Next, let's consider Judaism, which is pragmatic and positive. It's somewhat removed from the Buddhist concepts of nihilism and letting go of attachment. It positively views material wealth as a gift from God and focuses on how to use it wisely, such as charity. While it doesn't view the idea of it's all just one tatami mat as extreme asceticism and shun it, it rather considers enjoying and sharing the wealth one has been given to be good. Protestantism is divided into two extremes depending on the denomination and is split right down the middle based on historical background. Traditional denominations include Lutheranism and Calvinism. They value frugality and austerity and are therefore very compatible with the spirit of half a tatami mat and one tatami mat. They are wary of becoming addicted to wealth and value the perspective that before God, we are all equal and return naked. The other side is prosperity theology, found in evangelicals and other groups. Evangelicals, who are influential among Republican supporters in the United States, preach that if you have faith, you can become wealthy in this world. For them, the perspective of it's all just one tatami mat is sometimes even shunned as negative resignation that hinders positive faith. Islam, in some ways, is closer to the Japanese concept of impermanence than Christianity or Judaism and is very direct in its approach. In Islam, this world is called dunya, which carries the nuance of being low or ephemeral. The belief is that wealth and status in this world are merely testing tools for reaching the afterlife, ahira. This world, dunya, is, after all, merely a resting place on the journey. The analogy of a traveler does not carry luxurious furniture is also frequently used. The Prophet Muhammad also preached, "Live this world like a traveler resting in the shade of a tree," demonstrating a profound understanding that possessions beyond what is necessary hinder the journey. However, a common understanding in the Bible is vanity. Regardless of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, or denomination, the phrase vanity of vanities, all is vanity, from the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible, is the ultimate expression of ultimately. Here, we'll set aside the finer differences between denominations. Even within Christianity, there's the Eastern Orthodox Church, and within Islam, there's Shia and Sunni branches. First, we've compared the broad differences between these religions. They share the common value of vanity and a common moral sense. However, a major divergence in values arises from how they define wealth and this worldly existence, and this underlies religious conflict. For example, Catholicism and Islam prohibit interest income, while Judaism allows it. The Old Testament combines all aspects, doctrine, history, and collection of stories. However, interpretations of both doctrine, the covenant with God, and history of salvation, who is the legitimate successor, diverge. In historical interpretation, Judaism believes the Messiah, Savior, has not yet come, while Christianity considers Jesus to be the Messiah. Islam, while acknowledging Jesus as a prophet, considers Muhammad to be the last and greatest prophet. Regarding the nature of God as a doctrine, Judaism and Islam believe God is an absolute, one God, and that a human being like Christ could not become God. Whether or not to allow interest is not a matter of doctrine, but rather stems from differences in interpretation regarding the scope of who the Scripture's descriptions, laws, apply to and doctrinal views on wealth redistribution. A common prohibition is, "You shall not charge interest to your poor fellow Jews." Judaism strictly distinguishes between fellow Jews and non-Jews in its interpretation. Therefore, they engaged in the financial industry, which was forbidden by Christianity in medieval Europe. On the other hand, Islam absolutely forbids taking interest riba from anyone, as it is considered blasphemy against God. In Christianity, Catholicism was similar to Islam, but with the emergence of Protestantism during the Reformation and the development of capitalism, their interpretation changed. From this, it can be said that Judaism applied the exceptions written in its holy scriptures. If we consider the differences between these religions and sects along the axis of traditional religions and sects that value poverty versus religions and sects that view worldly prosperity as a blessing from God, and also add the axis of active and exclusive versus passive and receptive, we arrive at this four-quadrant matrix. The religions closest to the Japanese spirituality are so-called devout Christians, such as Catholics, Russian Orthodox Christians, and Lutheran Protestants. Similarly, Hinduism is also similar. Applying this to actual figures in the Catholic tradition, there is U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. In the Russian Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox traditions, there is President Putin and Hungarian Prime Minister Orban. And in the Hindu tradition, there is Indian Prime Minister Modi and U.S. Director of Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard. Coincidentally, the leaders I personally admire belong to the same groups. Furthermore, while their attitudes are diametrically opposed, exclusive versus receptive, Islam and Orthodox Judaism share similar spiritualities. Looking at it this way, the group on the right side shares the common characteristics of not interfering unnecessarily and not proactively criticizing other countries or individuals. On the other hand, the left-wing group exhibits a characteristic of actively wanting to intervene in the opponent's affairs. While European elites could include the U.S. Democratic Party, they tend to be ideologically driven and unwilling to accept values different from their own. This is also a characteristic of liberals. Furthermore, when this becomes aggressive, it tends to resemble the tendencies of Jewish Zionism or evangelicalism. Until 1979, evangelicals were quietly praying Christians. However, with the emergence of Jerry Falwell Sr., evangelicals became political, wealth-seeking, and fervent supporters of Israel. Underlying this was a sense of alienation among evangelicals within the U.S., creating fertile ground for radicalization due to a desire for power. This will be discussed in more detail next time. Evangelicals include Paula White of the White House Office of Faith and Secretary of Defense Pegasus. Also, Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican, a prominent figure in the neoconservative military-industrial complex, is a Southern Baptist with evangelical leanings. Radical Jewish Zionists include Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and leaders of his far-right party, as well as Ambassador Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, in the United States. Looking at it this way, it aligns very well with the fact that political leaders belonging to the left wing are the ones causing problems with globalism and instigating wars through military intervention. Ordinary citizens belonging to the left wing don't necessarily seem to exhibit these problematic tendencies. In fact, they are raising their voices to condemn political leaders. Considering this, the question arises, are the problems on the left wing not necessarily a matter of the spirituality of the people or their religious beliefs, but rather a problem of the political structure and system. And what they all have in common is that elections in these countries are expensive, or you can't run for office without the backing of financial powers. I'll leave the solution to this mystery for next time. Returning to the topic of religion, it seems natural that different religions would share a common least common multiple. In particular, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all people of the same Bible. If we return to their fundamental teachings, rather than later interpretations of the Bible, we find common ground. This is a common moral ethic. This would include things like not bullying the weak. Furthermore, the same applies to Buddhism and Hinduism. This is because a religion cannot spread in the first place without a moral ethic that resonates with and is acceptable to the general public. These common grounds are the following three common ethics. 1. Acceptance. 2. 3. Devotion. And the following are the 5 commandments common to each religion. 1. Cherish life. Do not kill. 2. Do not steal. Do not steal. 3. Do not lie. Do not lie. 4. Responsible sexual relations. Do not commit adultery. 5. Respect and love for others. Respect for parents, etc. These are common to Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. These 3 common ethics and 5 commandments are common to all humanity, regardless of religion. It seems possible to create a system that eliminates international conflict by placing these at the very foundation of what is known as the operating system of human society, even more fundamental than religion or international law. Regarding the origins of dualism between good and evil, early Judaism, such as the first half of the Old Testament, had little concept of a demon fighting on equal footing with God. The Western concept of absolute evil, the devil, was more strongly influenced by ancient Persian Zoroastrianism than by the Old Testament. Zoroastrianism is a thorough dualism that views the world as a battleground between the God of light, good, and the God of darkness, evil. This idea entered Judaism and later became established in Christianity as the God versus Satan conflict. From the Middle Ages onward, the Christian Church justified its struggles as a holy war by calling infidels and adversaries armies of the devil. This differs significantly from the Japanese concept. Western evil is inherently darkness, something to be annihilated and eliminated by light. However, Japanese evil is closer to shameful acts that deviate from morality or defilement of the heart. In Japan, even villains are considered human beings and are objects of repentance and memorial services. This difference is why the Western concept of the hammer of justice in modern international politics and conflicts is difficult for Japanese people to accept. I won't argue which is superior, the Western logic of exclusion or the Japanese logic of inclusion, but I believe that war will never end if only the logic of exclusion is used. Isn't the Japanese logic of inclusion also necessary? The group in the lower left represents the European political elite, and this group is considered liberal. It's important to understand that being liberal doesn't automatically mean not believing in religion. Many people around the world hold liberal ideals while deeply practicing a particular religion. However, the relationship between liberalism and religion has several distinctive aspects. One is religious liberalism, liberal theology, which tends to respect diversity, including the advancement of women's status, through flexible interpretation, and is interested in social reforms such as poverty relief and the elimination of discrimination. Politically, it is based on freedom of religion. Therefore, it can be said that liberals don't reject religion, but rather value individual freedom and reason more than religious doctrine, or try to improve society through religion. Universities in Europe and America tend to be particularly liberal. This is because many universities in Europe and America were originally established as Christian educational institutions. But since the 19th century, they have been separated from religion to ensure academic objectivity alongside the development of science. Furthermore, there is an aspect of trying to teach a new morality, secular morality, as an alternative to religion. These factors, carried on by academic trends such as critical theory, are giving rise to the current liberal problem of criticizing tradition and religion as tools of oppression. However, on the other hand, there's a growing movement of post-secularism that argues that it is impossible to completely eliminate religion, and that deep learning about religion is essential for multicultural understanding. Up to this point, we've looked purely at liberalism, but when this combines with a dualistic view of good and evil, it becomes troublesome. This is what is happening in modern international politics. The liberal universalism, held by Europe's liberal political elites, is ironically paradoxically possessing the same intensity and exclusivity as the religious missionary work and crusades of the past. In other words, European political elites have fallen into a denial of the other based on a dualistic view of liberal good versus illiberal evil, causing friction in international politics as follows. This leads to ideological exports and double standards that are only convenient for one's own country. Liberalism plus dualistic view of good and evil is not communism, even from its formation process. However, the progressive view of history, that history progresses, abandoning old values, religion, and moving towards an ideal society, and the attitude of condemning opponents as losers of history, structurally resemble the Marxist dogma that advocated communism in the past. In reality, this manifests as the conflict between Europe versus Hungary and Poland, the divergence of values with the global South, cancel culture and ideological censorship scene in American and British universities and media, and the failure of democratization in Afghanistan. These political failures of liberal elites can be concluded as follows: a paradox. Despite professing a concept that has progressed from the religion of liberalism, they are actually trapped and tainted by the concept of dualism of good and evil, a concept that developed in later religions. At least from what I have seen and heard, it seems that no European political elite has noticed this contradiction in the cause of failure and is reflecting on it. The software reasons why the US, Israel will lose in the Iran war. 1. Not faithful to the fundamental truth of the religion one believes in. 2. This is also rooted in contempt for and indifference towards history. 3. A loss of humility regarding the fact that liberal universalism is not omnipotent. 4. The contradiction between liberalism and the dualism of good and evil. 5. It's not about money. After all, a human being only needs half a tatami mat to sit on and one tatami mat to sleep on. Finally, I will reiterate the 3 ethics and 5 commandments common to all humanity. The 3 common ethics: acceptance, awe, devotion. And the 5 commandments common to all religions: value life, do not kill, do not steal, do not steal, do not lie, do not lie, maintain appropriate sexual relations, do not commit adultery, respect and love for others, respect for parents, etc.
We are moving into a world of competing truths. So, I have a question for you. In your field, have you encountered a situation where rational logic failed because a deeper, perhaps religious or cultural belief? How do we build a global dialogue when the very definition of justice differs at the OS level? Let's start that conversation in the comments. I'm Kyubei, and this is a deep dive into the global mind. Thank you.